You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 1st of November 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 2 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden.
Lumbering vessel full of rubbish drives a garbage truck. We'll have a US election update from our team in Atlanta. Also ahead, the annual Dorfman Prize anoints a future of architecture. Later in the show, we'll join the 50th birthday celebrations of Japan's most famous pop culture export, and
we definitely have a nostalgia and a deep love for those kind of brain teaser puzzle box movies. And there's really no better genre than the horror genre to talk about taboo things.
As Halloween recedes, we meet the writers and directors of the acclaimed horror film Heretic, all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. Election Day in the United States is just 4 days away, and the contenders for the presidency have been making very different climactic pitches. Vice President Kamala Harris has taken the more orthodox tack of holding triumphal rallies in front of placard-waving crowds in key swing states, while former President Donald Trump has put on an orange high-vis jacket, even oranger makeup, and driven round in circles in a garbage truck. I'm joined with more from Atlanta in the swing state of Georgia by Monocle's US editor, Chris Lord. Chris, first of all, I guess, what sense do you get of the stakes in play as you walk the streets of Atlanta? Is there noticeable pre-election hubbub?
There's an almighty hubbub around Halloween right now, I would say, actually, Andrew. I mean, I've seen so many people dressed inexplicably as bananas in the last couple of days that I don't know, this must be some kind of Atlanta, Georgia thing that they really want to represent themselves as fruit. But I would say, for sure, everybody is... I think the mood, if I had to pinpoint it, is on tenterhooks. I think while there is obviously an overwhelming sense of impending relief that this thing might come to an end soon after months of this endless sort of dominating the news cycle, I think also there is a concern, certainly here in Georgia, about what might happen down, just a few days away. I think, here is a place where there were so many allegations of voter fraud and conspiracy theories swirling around after the 2020 election that the people here are very fearful, I think, that once again their state is going to be because it's so close last time, how between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's going to be so close again that again that's going to open the floodgates for those who want to suggest that the system is buckling. And so there's fears, certainly when you talk to people here about obviously, potential violence that could happen, people spreading conspiracy theories, and I think there is a real sort of feeling here about here we go again. Beyond all that, I would say I think there is also a sort of a sense of how important this election is. I think so many Americans, when you speak to them, really recognise how much is at stake here. And regardless of which side of the fence they sit on, and I think that's a powder keg, I think, for going into something that's already so hyped up and charged up by both candidates.
I mean, fears of anything can become somewhat self-fulfilling prophecies, and you have written in this morning's Monocle Minute about a little light reading you were doing in Recoil Off-Grid magazine, and as listeners may already have gleaned from the title, it does appeal to a certain fairly niche demographic, but among, well, for want of a less pejorative term, relatively normal people, i.e. probably not Recoil Off-Grid subscribers. Do you find that those fears are genuinely and deeply held, that things might unravel quite precipitously?
So, as you mentioned in the Minute this morning, I talk about there's a magazine here, Recoil Off-Grid, which is aimed at survivalists in the US. Quite a surprisingly big group of readers and subscribers they are. And what it's cover story is essentially saying is, what you should do if there is civil unrest after the election. And the cover story, the illustration shows a guy looking at the Washington Monument as a plume of smoke goes up into the air. He is heavily armed as a kind of civilian militia. Now, obviously, this is not the sort of people we're associating with here in Atlanta. But what I would say is, I think that there are two real strong strains of thought. I think the first is an overwhelming sense of Americans not really trusting each other anymore, that they can keep the discourse going into this election civil and calm. I think ever since January 6, 2021, it's left a deep scar in the minds of most people in America, because obviously that was when rioters stormed the Capitol building. It was almost as if the lid came off about electoral violence or political violence in this country, which has a long history of that. But I think many people thought it had been buried. Since then, of course, we've had 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump. We've also had a rhetoric that has dialed up so hard going into this election on Tuesday. Donald Trump himself just overnight has been talking about potential voter fraud in Pennsylvania, talking about essentially very sketchy videos emerging from citizens, quoting, I say this in very tenuous quotes, Andrew, citizen journalists who arrive at polling stations filming large groups of people and say, look, they're trying to get inside and they're not allowed to vote. Well, none of this can be verified as actual attempts of voters or non-voters trying to infiltrate this election and stir things up. So you've got the candidate who is desperately trying to stoke that fire more and more. But then the other real strain of thought that I think cannot be overlooked here, and this is sort of something I wanted to try and allude to in my story this morning, is that 6 months ago we were talking about this election as a double haters election, as in most people didn't like either candidate. Now that was when Joe Biden was at the top of the Democratic ticket, Donald Trump was still there, and at that point he hadn't been shot at or attempted to be shot twice. So the stakes have changed. There is a different player at the top of the Democratic ticket. But I think we also have to really recognise that we could go into Tuesday with a lot of people genuinely feeling that they can't vote for either candidate and simply not voting. Now, we interviewed somebody on the Daily yesterday, a former congressman for the district where we are here in Atlanta. And he made that point. He said, this is our great fear, is that after all this, yes, it might be a very charged atmosphere and we might all be worried about voter fraud or indeed, political violence. But what if just people don't show up? What if they're just not interested? And of course, when you get out to the swing states in the Midwest, where you have huge Arab American populations, many of whom have said they simply cannot, and they're dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, they cannot go out and vote for Kamala Harris because of the actions of the Biden administration with regards to Gaza and Israel. These people are not going to vote the other side. They're just not going to vote at all. And so, that is sort of a slightly grim vision of what that might be, we have to also recognise people may well just be turned off on Tuesday, and we might not actually get the huge turnouts that we're expecting.
Chris, just finally and quickly, tonight's Daily will also be coming from Atlanta. Can you give us a preview of what's on the show?
Look, we're going to be talking quite in depth about crime and law and order. And going into this election, when we started, that was a very top issue for a lot of voters. Now, inevitably in an American election, what storms in is the economy, and that sort of overtakes a lot of the oxygen. But I think disorder, crime, and cities, essentially, which is essentially where this all ends up, is still very, very important to a lot of voters. I think it connects with a lot of issues, fears about cost of living, inequalities, also immigration, also the border. It connects with a lot of different things. So we've got a few different guests. We're going to talk about law enforcement here, how equitable justice is in the US. When we went into that last election in 2020, crime and the way that crime was meted out was so important, and the sense of an inequality of that. And so we're going to be, we are in a city with a very, very large African American population that has, seen instances of police heavy-handedness in the past. Essentially, what does the future of law and order look like? How should it look like going into this next administration, and where are the concerns? And then we'll also be doing a little bit of a roundup. We've got correspondents all over the US right now who are, watching their local races. We're going to be doing a bit of a bounce around them, Andrew, and hearing the views from Pennsylvania, also from Seattle and elsewhere.
Chris Lord, thank you for joining us, and don't forget to tune in to that daily at 1800 London time later today. You're listening to The Briefing. Here is Laura Kramer with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Botswana's ruling party, BDP, has lost its parliamentary majority by a landslide, ending nearly 60 years in power. Opposition coalition Umbrella for Democratic Change has a significant lead as some constituencies continue to report results. Israel has hit Beirut suburbs with powerful airstrikes today, targeting the dense urban area after issuing an evacuation order. The attack comes as the U.S. continues efforts to secure a ceasefire in the region to little avail. And in Japan, cyclists using a mobile phone while riding could face up to 6 months jail under strict new rules introduced today. Should they cause an accident under these circumstances, the prison sentence could reach a year. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Laura, you are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And last night, the Royal Academy of Arts announced the winner of the 2024 Dorfman Prize, bestowed annually for architecture which has furnished some sort of vision of the future while acknowledging geographical, social and political challenges. This year's nominees included a Ukrainian collective effecting repairs to bombed-out houses, a Moroccan architect restoring historic buildings, a Berlin practice who turned an abandoned East German lingerie factory into a brutalist villa, and a multidisciplinary Swiss-Serbian outfit. Well, joining me now with the envelope is Tim Abrahams, contributing editor to the Architectural Record. Tim, who won?
The winner was the Ukrainian team, Lviv Beret. The phrase means left bank and the home of its 3 members, which refers to the east bank of the Dnieper River. Only one of the collective could attend. The female participant, Ksenia Kalmar, she was able to attend. The other 2 are because of martial law or rules in Ukraine about the young men traveling. They were not able to attend, so she accepted it on their behalf.
I mean, there's obviously a reason why a Ukrainian outfit of that sort would attract a measure of sympathy at a time like this. But was that why they won? Leaving aside the circumstances in which they're working, was there something especially innovative about what they're doing?
Very good question, Andrew. I had that very thought before before Ksenia's presentation. But what Lviv Beret have done, which I think is really interesting, is approached the condition of damage within the Dnieper River region and look at how they can best affect change. And what they've realized is that consolidating roofs is the best program that they can undertake. And what they are doing is using a single material, profiled aluminium, and rolling that out wherever they can see a home which is damaged in that regard. They secure the roofs using this uniform material, so it creates this sense of a unifying visual appeal, and they deal with that problem. They move on to the next village, the next roofs, and they move on, leaving local groups to maintain the upkeep of any damaged buildings. It's very thoughtful, and they've also shown they've got plenty of architectural ability. They've, in the way that they've used exhibitions. There was an exhibition in Dorfman that they did recently to show their work in a prefabricated house, which they used as a presentation space to show their work. This was then returned and became a home in the Dnieper region. One of their missions, they feel, is to also communicate the work that they are doing and the condition of the people that they are working for, which they do very successfully, the communicative capacity for architecture.
That was what was interesting to me about their project, because obviously putting a roof on a damaged building is about as fundamental as architecture gets. That is just providing somebody with emergency shelter, literally the proverbial roof over their heads. But did they think it was important that there was more to it than that there was some sort of perhaps cohesive, unifying statement in the way they went about it?
Indeed, and what they have done is choose specific materials, choose specific areas to operate in. They've done a huge number of houses, but they're also looking at larger structures now. They are working with a lot of schools and improving schools. The way in which they think is also very interesting. I think that they must be the only practice to ever win an architectural award who are also have a sideline in a crowdfunding platform for drones. So they are, as well as the thinking of the protecting, they are also involved in the, shall we say, the more offensive part of war. They're very much embedded in the project of their country and looking to work with whatever is to hand. There's a very throughout the whole of the award, there was a sense of practices who work very much with what is to hand, what is immediate to them, not something that they've learned through architecture school, but a sense of the material conditions surrounding them and addressing that, which you cannot say that they are not doing.
Well, let's take a look then at the rest of the field, and it is an astonishingly disparate panel of nominees working with different materials in very different environments. But from within all that, is there anything coherent we can glean about the direction in which architecture is travelling?
Indeed, there is. I mean, I think it's one of the ways in which the award works is to try and identify a kind of an emerging sense of the direction of architectural practice. And I would say that the two things, I would like to say that it was me saying this, but it was actually Tom Emerson, who was the excellent chair of the panel, identified that there were two strong kind of cohesive ideas. One about repair, repairing existing structures in innovative ways, and collective action. So you have the different practices, B+, who are based in Germany, who their odd anti-villa project, which you alluded to in your introduction, where the facade is covered with shotcrete rather than being insulated from inside. They've actually decided that it's much more economically viable to add the insulation on the outside, take off the gabled roof, put a big bit of concrete on the top, and then punch holes in the wall. So they're rethinking the idea, if we are to be more environmentally concerned, if we are to be energy efficient with our architecture, we have to be cost efficient as well. So actually the traditional ideas of how you make a building energy efficient have to be rethought. You have to go from the outside in rather than the inside out.
Tim Abrahams at the Architectural Record, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It is 50 years since a mouthless white Japanese cat captured its first heart. Unleashed by illustrator Shimizu Yuko on November 1st, 1974, the Hello Kitty character is now emblazoned upon a bewildering array of merchandise, generating annual revenues estimated at north of $4 billion. I'm joined with more on the half-century of Hello Kitty by Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief Fiona Wilson. Fiona, is the anniversary a big deal in Japan?
Look, I mean, Hello Kitty, or as she's known here, Kitty-chan, is always a big deal in Japan. She's had a quieter few years, I would say. You know, like many middle-aged women, she went a bit low in visibility. But I think they've been doing a lot of collaborations for her birthday. So they've got an exhibition. They've been doing collaborations with, you name it, Baskin-Robbins. Honda have got in on they've done a special edition, if you can believe it, a special edition of the Honda Super Cub, the little scooter they do. So, I think, that there's never a shortage of Kitty-chan in Japan. And this is just another reason to celebrate her.
I mean, among all the celebrations, and I'm sure attendant beard scratching about its significance, has any consensus developed on why this, of all the cartoon characters created by Japanese artists over the years, was the one that really took off, not just in Japan, but all over the world?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think part of her sort of success is there's a bit of a mystery about her, isn't there? I mean, she does have a backstory, believe it or not. There's an origin story for Hello Kitty, that she was born in London, believe it or not, the height of 5 apples, the weight of 3 apples. but she doesn't have a mouth, as you say, so she can never really voice anything herself. So you can sort of project onto her whatever you want, and basically in whatever language you want. So I think in some ways she was a sort of a cute blank canvas. I think also, she is just the way she was drawn, and this was in the mid 70s, and I think it was something quite novel. And really, from the word go, they were already onto the merchandise. There was merch for Kitty Chan from the mid 70s. Started with a vinyl purse, ended up with everything. I mean, a toaster, a duvet cover, you name it. And I think what they really found out was, initially they thought this will appeal to young children, and then they realised it actually appealed to older people who should have known better. So they could put her on anything. She had an amazing run, and I think she's having a bit of a revival now.
I mean, if it was novel 50 years ago, it has certainly since ceased being so. I mean, Hello Kitty has become ubiquitous, as we were saying, not just in Japan, but everywhere. But Japanese popular culture over that half century has become, rightly or wrongly, associated with a certain cutesiness, even a tweeness, if you like. So the question is, does Hello Kitty merely reflect that tendency, or should we hold Hello Kitty responsible for it?
I think she's a bit like Mickey Mouse. She's kind of outside the trends of popular culture. And actually, honestly, within the Sanrio world, so she belongs to Sanrio, this company that has a whole stable of characters. I mean, Kitty herself, she's got a boyfriend. I don't know if you're familiar with Dear Daniel. She's got a cat of her own, Charmy Kitty. She's got a twin sister. So that's just within the sort of Kitty family. But then there are all these other characters. She's actually, I'm afraid, outranked by a dog that looks like a cinnamon roll on the commercial front these days. But no, I think, she's really beyond trend. And actually the trend in a lot of the characters, I think a lot of people are really drawn to these slightly doomy, gloomy Sanrio characters at the moment. There's a red panda who loves heavy metal. She's an office lady who gets a bit angry about life. She's really popular. So Kitty is maybe a little bit, simple in some ways, but I think, she still appeals to all ages, all cultures. She's big all over Asia. And I think there's a nostalgia for her. She doesn't maybe reflect really the current trends in popular culture, but I think, everyone knows who she is.
I mean, even if she has been by now upstaged by an angry red panda and a cinnamon roll resembling dog, is she co-opted by Japan as any kind of soft power asset? Are incoming ambassadors presented with Hello Kitty tat? Is she deployed at big international events? Does Japan make use of Hello Kitty?
Well, I mean, you may have noticed or not that King Charles wished her a happy birthday when the Emperor of Japan and Empress visited London earlier in the summer. She did merit a mention in one of his speeches. So, she's an amazing soft power asset. But sometimes I wonder, do people even know she's Japanese? And lots of questions have been raised. Is she Japanese? I mean, that is a big philosophical question, because I think Sanrio, Shintaro Tsuji, the founder of the company, didn't really give her a nationality. He said, yes, she's born in London, but it was always a bit vague about, is she even a cat? Is she British? Is she Japanese? And I think maybe that's part of the success. And the company now is run by Shintaro's grandson, Tomokuni Tsuji, took over in 2020. The company was slightly in the doldrums. And if, when he was born, Hello Kitty was already 14, so she's older than the CEO of the company. But he's really turned the company round. It was struggling, and he's focused on much bigger collaborations. He's clamped down hard on fake Hello Kitties, and he's also brought out a whole other host of characters who are not necessarily in Kitty's world. But he's made Sanrio a much more powerful force, and the share price has really rocketed. He took over in 2020. He still looks very baby-faced. You might have seen him about a bit today. He's speaking a lot about Kitty Chan. But I think there's just such a sort of association with Sanrio and Kitty Chan. No getting away from it.
And Fiona, just finally, by way of illustrating or not the degree to which Hello Kitty has become a household fixture in Japan, in your household, is there any knowingly acquired inspired Hello Kitty merch at all?
Even if you don't want it. In fact, I bought some plasters the other day, for injuries, and by accident, I wasn't paying attention. I bought Hello Kitty themed plasters, so any injury in my house will be emblazoned with Hello Kitty.
Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor, thank you for joining us. This is the briefing on Monocle Radio, and in the weekend of Halloween, what better way to finish the show than with a horror film recommendation? Heretic is a new psychological thriller by production company A24, starring Hugh Grant as the suave and sinister Mr. Reed. The story follows two young missionaries who visit a reclusive man's cavernous home to discuss faith, only to be ensnared in a chilling game of terror and manipulation. Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco caught up with the writers and directors of Heretic to hear more about the making of a cerebral horror film.
Scott Beck and Brian Woods, first of all, a pleasure talking to you guys, a big fan here. And a question, to both of you, whoever wants to start. I mean, what I really loved about Heretic is it's very cerebral. I think it brought something different to horror, especially in the last 2-3 years. I mean, there's been great films, but I think I love how talky it is. I don't know if I can use that that word in a way. So tell us a bit more, because of course you guys wrote the script for it as well.
Thanks for saying that. First of all, that's really sweet. We kind of missed this era of movie going. It's weird when we were young in school, young kids trying to make movies. It's like the movies that came out every week. It was one week it would be Memento, and then it would be Donnie Darko and Fight Club and Mulholland Drive, these very cerebral movies. And those were like the cool big movies of the year. And it seems like that whole brain teaser subgenre has disappeared. So how you're describing Heretic, I'm not saying we're quite in that category because we're a bit of a horror thriller, but we definitely have a nostalgia and a deep love for those kind of brain teaser puzzle box movies. And really the film, we hope, is a conversation about religion. It's a conversation about a very divisive, difficult, dangerous topic. And, there's really no better genre than the horror genre to talk about taboo things. And we wanted to kind of express our anxieties, our fears about death. What happens when you die? Is there an afterlife? Is there not an afterlife? Either way, to Scott and I, who are easy scares, either way, it's scary, and try to attempt to put that in an entertaining cinematic narrative.
Welcome.
We need to return to the church.
If you are ready to leave, you'll have to exit through the back of my house.
So which door?
It's a simple choice, but it should not be made simply.
And there are no easy answers, when it comes to religion. And I think the film portrays that very well. And I was reading the film notes. I actually didn't know that the main actress, Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East, they actually had some sort of experience with the Mormon church. Was that a coincidence, or was that part of the casting as well?
Yeah, it was a coincidence in terms of the process of discovering that information. Our wide net was really cast to just find the best actors possible to embody these roles. And throughout the casting process, as you see people reading this, putting themselves on tape and then doing callbacks and such, Chloe and Sophie, we kept coming back to because there was such a rich authenticity to the way that they were embodying Sister Pax and Sister Barnes, from what they were wearing to like the cadence of their speech. There was this like nice politeness that they had, and we couldn't shake, like, is this actually who they are, or is it their portrayal of the role? And it felt like it was a merge of the two as soon as we found out their history with the Mormon church and the fact that they grew up in it. They still had friends or family members that were participating. And throughout, I think, the audition process, but certainly during the filming of this, of Heretic, they were using those avenues as resources to make sure that it was as genuine and authentic as possible. And that degree of representation was very important to us, to make sure that we weren't trying to exploit Mormonism. We weren't trying to make a mockery of it. Really, we were trying to get to the heart of who these people would really be in real life.
And you really didn't. You mentioned the word mockery. I think that's quite interesting. I was pleasantly surprised. But let's talk about Mr. Reed as a character, played amazingly by Hugh Grant. I think for this role, the person needs to be funny as well. And I think that Hugh Grant kind of brings a little bit of that. I was wondering, were you guys thinking of him when you had the script? Or again, was kind of a long process to find out the name of the actor for that?
It was a process, because when we wrote Mr. Reed, we felt like this is, in terms of difficulty of acting for our money, and as directors, it felt like it was a 10 out of 10. It felt like it was an extremely tough ask to get somebody who could not only be charming and likable enough to convince the missionaries as well as the audience to come into his house and sit and have a conversation, but also somebody who's funny and can be scary and then can monologue for 10 pages and hold our interest. It was a very, very narrow list. Script started kind of spreading around town in Hollywood. There were a lot of movie stars who started raising their hands asking to play the role. And that put even more pressure on us to make sure that whoever we asked to come make this movie with us, that they were at the top of their game. We just kept talking about Hugh Grant. We just kept talking about him. In the last 10 years, Hugh has really become, for our money, one of the great character actors in cinema history. He's taking bold swings every single role, whether it's Cloud Atlas, where he plays multiple roles and you can't even tell he's in the movie. He disappears so convincingly, all the way to his recent work as an Oompa Loompa and Wonka. It's just like, this is an actor who is constantly trying to do the impossible and succeeding. So we were just thrilled. We felt like we could weaponize 30 years of his relationship with an audience, goodwill that he has with the audience and the respect and love they have. But we also felt like we were getting, a great actor at the top of their game.
That was Scott Beck and Brian Woods talking to Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Heretic is in cinemas now, and you can listen to Fernando's full interview with the directors on the Monocle Weekly page on monocle.com. That is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer. Our researchers were Sana Jumani and Gunnar Grunled, and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing returns on Monday at the same time, midday UK. Don't forget to tune in to The Daily, live from Atlanta at 1800 London time tonight, which will be 1400, I think, in Atlanta. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.